All right, let's dive in. We got a chapter sent in all about genetics.
Oh, nice.
And, it's amazing how much we keep learning about what makes us, well, us.
Yeah, it's incredible. This chapter, does a fantastic job of explaining that stuff.
It totally does.
Yeah.
But you know what I like best? It's not just all this theory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It connects it to real life, like how our genes can, affect our health and everything.
Absolutely. That's the most fascinating part, I think.
Okay, so let's get started. Where should we begin with all this genetic stuff?
Well, I always think the best place to start is with the fundamentals,
Right.
That central dogma of genetics.
Oh, and the whole DNA makes RNA and RNA makes protein thing.
Yeah, that's the one. And then those proteins are really what run the whole show.
Okay, so let me see if I got this straight.
Sure.
DNA is like the big instruction manual, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then RNA, that's like the messenger delivering the instructions.
Perfect.
And finally, you got the proteins, the actual workers building and running our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Spot on. Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, cool. So we've got the basics down.
Uh-huh.
But what about these things called genes? They're mentioned a lot in the chapter.
Oh, right. Genes are basically segments of DNA, and they code for specific proteins.
Like each gene has its own special job.
Exactly. It's like, think of chromosomes as chapters in a massive cookbook, right?
Okay, I can picture that.
And each gene is like a unique recipe in that chapter, one that makes a particular protein.
Wow, I like that analogy. Makes it much easier to understand.
Glad to hear it.
But hold on, there's also this word alleles. What are those exactly?
Alleles. Think of them like different versions of the same recipe.
Really?
Yeah, like you might have a recipe for, say, chocolate chip cookies.
I love those.
But one version calls for milk chocolate chips, and another uses dark chocolate.
Oh, so they both make cookies, but they'll taste a bit different.
Exactly. They're both cookies, but the final product has a slight variation.
So that's how we get all this diversity in human traits. It's all about these different alleles.
Yeah. Exactly. It all boils down to which specific combination of alleles we get from our parents.
Right, speaking of parents, the chapter also talks about this whole dominant and recessive gene thing.
Right.
Can we break that down a bit? I always get a little confused about how it all works.
Oh, sure. Think of it this way. Dominant alleles, they're like the bossy sibling.
The one who always gets their way.
Yeah. Even if you only inherit one copy of that dominant allele, its trait will show up.
Okay, got it.
And you have recessive alleles. They're more like the shy sibling.
The one who needs a buddy to be heard.
Exactly. You need to inherit 2 copies of a recessive allele for it to show up.
So if I get a brown eye allele from my mom and a blue eye allele from my dad,
Right.
I'd end up with brown eyes because brown is dominant.
You got it. But here's the thing. You still carry that blue eye allele even though you have brown eyes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you could pass it on to your kids. And if they, got another blue eye allele from the other parent, they could end up with blue eyes.
Wow, so it's like a genetic lottery. You never know what you might pass down.
Absolutely. That's what makes genetics so fascinating.
Now, the chapter also mentions this X-linked inheritance thing. What's that all about?
Oh, that one's interesting. It's about genes that are located on the X chromosome.
Okay.
Which is one of the sex chromosomes.
Right. Females have 2 X chromosomes and males have 1 X and 1 Y, right?
Exactly. And because of that, males are more likely to express certain recessive traits that are linked to those X chromosome genes.
Oh, I see. Because they only have 1 copy of the X chromosome, there's no matching allele on the Y chromosome to, counteract it.
Precisely. That's why you see conditions like color blindness and hemophilia more often in males.
So females can be carriers, but they don't necessarily show the traits themselves.
Unless they happen to inherit 2 copies of that recessive allele, yeah.
Wow, this whole section about inheritance is making me think about family history a lot.
Right.
It really highlights how important it is to understand those potential genetic risks we might be carrying.
I agree. It's information that could be really important for making, health decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just the beginning, though, right?
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to unpack. We haven't even touched on epigenetics yet.
Epigenetics, that's the one where, our environment can affect our genes, right?
You got it. Imagine you have identical twins, same DNA, but one grows up, in a supportive environment,
Okay.
and the other faces a lot of challenges. Those different experiences can actually lead to changes in how their genes are expressed.
Really? So even though their genes are the same, their health and even personality could be different because of their environment.
Exactly. It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
It's like our environment can kind of fine-tune how our genes work, like a dimmer switch for our genes.
That's a perfect analogy. And this chapter has some amazing real-world examples.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Dutch hunger winter?
Hmm. That rings a bell, but I can't remember the details.
Okay, well, during World War II, there was this terrible famine in the Netherlands. Children who were, born or conceived during that time experienced some pretty dramatic epigenetic changes.
Wow, because of the famine.
Yeah. And it impacted their health for, like, decades after.
So even though they had the same genes as their siblings born before or after the famine, they were more prone to health problems because of what they experienced.
Exactly. It shows how powerful these environmental effects can be, even for a short period.
That's incredible. So it's not just our external environment that matters, right?
Mm.
The chapter also talks about the microbiome, all those bacteria and microorganisms living inside us.
Oh, yeah. Those tiny critters are more important than we realize.
Wait a minute, they have genes too.
They do. And
Yeah.
you know what? Those microbial genes can affect all sorts of things in our bodies.
Like what?
Everything. From our digestion to our immune system, even our mood.
Seriously. So it's like we're not just walking, talking humans, we're walking, talking ecosystem.
Very much. It's wild, right?
It totally is. It's amazing and a little creepy at the same
I
time.
know what you mean.
But the cool thing is that the makeup of our microbiome can change based on things like our diet and environment.
Exactly. It's constantly evolving.
So this is blowing my mind. We're not just stuck with the genes we inherit. We can actually, influence how those genes are expressed.
Exactly. Through our lifestyle choices and the environment we create for ourselves.
Wow, this is so empowering. It feels like we have more control than we think.
And that's one of the things that makes genetics so exciting. It's not about being stuck. It's about understanding this interplay between nature and nurture.
And then using that knowledge to make better choices for ourselves and, future generations.
That's the goal.
So our genes and environment work together. That's amazing. But this chapter keeps going.
It does. It really does.
It gets into these, complex gene interactions, talking about things like alcohol use disorder and nearsightedness.
Oh, yeah. Those are really good examples. They show how nature and nurture, work together,
Right. It's not just about having bad genes or something, right?
Exactly. You could have genes that make you more likely to have these things.
Okay.
But your environment and the choices you make play a huge role, too.
So even if, let's say, someone's family has a history of alcohol addiction,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean they're automatically going to become an alcoholic.
No, not at all. Things like how you were raised, your friends, how you cope with stress,
Yeah.
even just having support, all of that matters.
Okay, so it's not just about our genes. It's about how those genes interact with our lives.
Exactly. Imagine, you have this move you're predisposed to do.
Yeah.
But, your dance partner and the music playing will change how that move actually looks.
Wow, that's a great analogy. It really makes it clear how genes and environment work together.
I'm glad it helps.
So what about nearsightedness?
Yeah.
The chapter talked about how being outdoors more could actually help.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of research showing that.
Really? So it's not just about genetics.
Nope. It seems like natural light, especially when you're a kid, helps your eyes develop, right?
So it's giving your eye muscles a workout.
Exactly. So even if you have genes that make you more likely to be nearsighted, being outside can help counteract that.
Okay, that's pretty amazing.
Mm.
It's like we have more control over our health than we think.
For sure. But the chapter also talks about the harder stuff, like chromosomal and genetic disorders.
Yeah, that part was a bit heavy, but also really important.
Totally. We're lucky that most of us get a full set of chromosomes.
Right, 46 of them.
Yeah, but sometimes things go wrong.
Like during cell division.
Yeah, you can end up with an extra or missing chromosome, and that can affect development.
The example they gave about Down syndrome was really interesting.
Trisomy 21, right? It's crazy how just one extra copy of that chromosome can have such a big effect.
Yeah, it really shows the power of those chromosomes. But,
Right.
the chapter also made it clear that Down syndrome isn't one size fits all.
Right. Every person is different, just like in any other group.
Yeah, and with the right support, people with Down syndrome can lead fulfilling lives.
Absolutely. And it challenges a lot of those old assumptions about what they can and can't do.
So understanding genetics isn't about labeling people.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding how we can support people better.
Exactly. And the chapter doesn't just stop with chromosome issues. It talks about single gene disorders, too.
Right. Those are caused by problems with specific genes, not the whole chromosome.
Exactly. We all carry a few iffy genes, let's call them.
Uh-huh.
But luckily, most of them are recessive, so they only matter if both parents have the same one.
Yeah. And the chapter did a good job explaining the difference between dominant and recessive disorders.
It did. With the dominant ones, like Huntington's disease, You only need one copy of the bad gene to get sick.
But with the recessive ones, you could be a carrier and not even know it.
Right. You could pass it on to your kids, and if your partner is a carrier, too.
There's a chance their child could inherit 2 copies and get the disorder.
Exactly. The stats on that are kind of scary, you know?
Yeah, like how common it is to be a carrier for some of these serious conditions.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. And that's where genetic counseling can be so helpful, right?
Absolutely. This chapter talked a lot about how genetic counselors help people understand their risks.
Yeah, and help them make decisions about family planning and stuff.
And connect them with support, too.
It sounds like they're like guides, helping people navigate this whole world of genetics.
They are. It can be really overwhelming, all this information.
Yeah, for sure. And they also help with the ethical side of things.
Mm-hmm. Like making sure everything's confidential.
Right, and respecting people's choices.
It's not just about giving people a bunch of data. It's about helping them use that data to make decisions that are right for them.
This whole conversation really shows how genetics isn't just about science.
Totally.
It's about people, their lives, their choices.
Right. It's about real people facing real challenges.
And that brings up a really important point from the chapter.
What's that?
The need to balance this genetic knowledge with a broader view of health.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like, it's easy to get caught up in genes and forget that other things matter too.
Yeah, things like poverty, access to healthcare, where you live.
All of that can affect your health no matter what your genes are.
Exactly. So this chapter reminds us that while genes give us a starting point,
Our environment and our choices play a huge role in how those genes actually work.
it's call to action, really.
Like, we need to address those bigger issues, not just focus on individual genes.
Right, we need to create a world where everyone has the chance to be healthy.
Man, this chapter has been quite a journey. So much to think about when it comes to our genes.
It really is amazing how much we're learning about what makes us, well, us.
And, you know, it's not just about the genes themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how they interact with our environment, our choices, everything.
It's this incredible dance between nature and nurture, like you said.
Right. And it makes you wonder about, like, what the future holds.
Yeah, especially with all these new genetic technologies coming out.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Like, imagine if scientists could actually edit our genes.
It's almost hard to imagine, right?
I know. What if we could, like, prevent diseases before they even happen?
It would be revolutionary. Think about a world without, like, cystic fibrosis or Huntington's.
It's mind-blowing, but also a little scary, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like, where do we draw the line?
Right. Like, what if by changing our genes, we accidentally create new problems?
That's a real possibility. This chapter doesn't give us all the answers, but it definitely makes you think.
It does. It makes you realize that scientific progress isn't always simple.
Definitely not. It comes with ethical questions and potential consequences that we have to consider.
It's like we need to be informed citizens, not just, letting science happen without thinking about it.
I completely agree. And that's where genetic literacy is so crucial.
Right. The more we understand about our genes,
The better decisions we can make for ourselves, for our families.
and even for society as a whole.
Absolutely. It's like we're being given this powerful tool.
And it's up to us to use it responsibly.
Knowledge is power. And in this case, it's power over our own health and future.
It's a lot to take in, but this chapter really highlights how our genes aren't, like, set in stone.
They're not. They're dynamic, and we can influence how they work.
It's not just about being born with good genes. It's about creating a good environment for those genes to do their thing.
I love that. It's a much more holistic view of health, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's not just about DNA, it's about everything that affects our well-being.
Exactly.
Wow. I have to say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It really has. It makes you appreciate the complexity of it all.
And also feel a sense of, like, responsibility,
For sure. It's a privilege to have this knowledge, and we need to use it wisely.
Well said. And to our listener, thank you so much for sending in this amazing chapter.
It was a great one. I hope this deep dive gave you some new things to think about.
I think it definitely did. And remember, this is just the start. The world of genetics keeps changing, so keep learning and exploring.
That's the best advice. Stay curious, everyone.
And that's a wrap for another deep dive. Thanks for joining us.